Hi, everybody. So what we're going to be doing in this critique is looking at everybody's character projects and focusing on some new things, I guess, in the character designs. Um, the assignment asks you to just keep working, refining your project, and maybe making some corrections, if you have any kind of sort of small kind of cosmetic imperfections in your photographs. We've learned how to correct those, so that's going to be something that you focused on. And what we'll also take a look at is just the design of the character. We'll revisit the backgrounds, maybe revisit the text a little bit, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit too just about sort of polishing the design with an eye towards looking at color, which I think can really be a very great thing to play with at this stage. Now that you have some of the tools to experiment with color, we'll look at how we can kind of create a really good sort of strong palette for your design. And some of you are already heading in that direction anyhow, so it'll just be, refining that a little bit. We'll also talk about maybe adding some movement to the character design, which I think can be really, really fun to do at this point and sort of bring your character to life. What tends to happen is when people are designing their character and putting it together, they kind of put it in a sort of a, just a sort of a basic sort of standing position, but there's all kinds of things you can do with your character, whether it's just moving the, arms and legs around or tilting the head, or you can go further and you can work with puppet warp as well, which can be really great. If you remember back in, I think it was milestone 3, when you tip the head backwards, uh, that using that called the puppet warp technique, that is really a fun thing to work with. Um, and let's see, so adjustment layers are the thing that you were going to be adding, one of the requirements, and I'm pretty sure everybody's got a few layer or adjustment layers in their character, but maybe there's an opportunity to keep building it. And so we'll kind of focus a little bit too on maybe some things we can do with adjustment layers that you didn't know about. We'll see. Hi Joshua. Okay, yeah. So you made some changes here, which is great. Let me just double check what you said. Okay, yes. So you worked on your cleanup of your some of your photos, and yeah, overall, I mean, to me, it looks like in general, um, boy, isn't that a nice banana? Look at all the detail on there. That you really didn't have a lot to do, because I think your photographs in general looked pretty good. A lot of that cleanup really depends on your original photographs for everybody. So I would say, so let's actually, I think we'll just head right in and talk a little bit about the design, which I think overall is looking really good. Um, your layout, your background, I think was a really nice choice. It's very simple and kind of textured. Um, and really, I think, yeah, it's a good background. And your character design, I think, is looking really good. You already have quite a lot of movement in your character because of just the sort of the waving little kind of arms and legs, or legs, you could say, and just the way you've designed the character, it has that quality to it. So I think the thing that I would work on a little bit more is color, the balance between the foreground and the background, and then I would say, still keep working a little bit more maybe on the text to emphasize it a little bit more, make it maybe a bit bigger, just to set it off a little bit more. Okay, let's start with color here. So in general, what I like to do when I'm working with color, I think I may have mentioned this in a previous group critique, is that I like to go through and name the different colors that I have in my design, just kind of create a list, and see which of the colors I like the most, and maybe if I can move other colors into my chosen color palette. And you already actually have a pretty strong definitive color palette. You've got a lot of yellows and oranges and this kind of lighter cream color. And then kind of, I'm going to say the background to me is like kind of an earthy orange, which is the potato. And then a few touches of red. So all kind of in the warmer colors. So I think that really, to me, reads as you know, that's your color palette because it all really fits together. And the only thing that to me at this point stands out as being not belonging to the color palette is this touch of blue in the blueberry. Um, so there's two things you could do here. If you really like that blue, what you can do is you can take your text, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to do this or not. I don't think I have your text, which is, again, a lot of people, you know, there's so many free fonts out there, or even, you know, the Adobe, the new Adobe we have allows you to download additional fonts. So there's kind of a lot of options out there. So I don't think I've got that font. But if you did, what you could do is you could open up the character palette right in here, and oh, maybe I can. I don't know. Maybe I can still do that. I don't think I want to. Yeah, so what you could do is you could click on this color. I don't think I can do it, but you can. And then it'll turn into an eyedropper tool, and you can actually sample a color directly from your eye to match that blue if you want to do that. The other option too, which is also, I think, possibility here. I noticed you don't have any adjustment layers in your character, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, but something you can do is use adjustment layers to change the color of the blueberries. So we can go in here, and there's actually quite a lot of adjustment layers that work on color. And there's a lot of similarities between them, but then there's also maybe a little bit of difference. Like hue and saturation is one of the easiest ones to work with, I find, because you can just go up here and you can just, and I want to make sure that, see there, I didn't clip that, did I? So I'm going to clip that, and then you can just move this slider around, and then it will change the colors. Now it's a little limited, you can't always change it to all the colors. Sometimes you can, if you hit the colorize button, sometimes you'll get a little bit of more of a stronger color, but you can see how I'm able to change that. I'm sort of, you know, so what I'm doing is I'm thinking maybe I can somehow match the yellow or the red, or the brown color, you know, to bring it in. Let's actually, let's just actually go ahead and delete that. For some reason, adjustment layers don't really respond to the delete command, like to the delete command if you want to go back in time. There we go. Let's just turn that off. Okay, so let's try another one here. So we'll go back here, and another thing you can do is you can go to color balance. That's another one. And so what we can do here, this is where you get like a little more control over the color. You know, you can see there's 3 different sliders here, and it's cyan, magenta, and yellow, which is really another kind of, it's the, so cyan would be like the blue color, bluey green color, magenta is like purple, and yellow. And so you kind of like use these to adjust your color. So for example, let's have maybe more red, because we want to reduce the blue, right? So we don't want to go towards the blue, we want to go way to the blue. And maybe we could even add more green. If we want to go to the green, maybe we could add more yellow. So now we're getting it more, you know, into the yellow color, if that's something you'd want to do. So we could do yellow, we could go maybe more orange. Let's see, I think we'll turn down the green here and see if we can get it more orange. You kind of have to know your color theory a little bit, or just sort of get a sense of it. Well, anyhow, so we've gone towards red. I don't know if I like that color or not. I think I like the yellow more. But you can see that you can sort of really play around with colors with the color balance. And there's one other one here that we can use, but I don't know if that would, there's another one here called selective color, which I don't think we'll use for yours. We might explore that later in the group critique. But anyhow, so you might want to use adjustment layers for your eyes to change the color of those. The other place I would look at for an adjustment layers, so your background, let's go to your background here. So one of the things, because you have really good color harmony, which is great, but what's happening here is that your character, especially your potato, is kind of like blending in to the background because they're so similar. So something you could do is to reduce the color in the background. What that will do is it'll actually bring your character forward. So that's something I like to do. Like if you've taken color theory already, you know that in color theory, cooler colors recede, darker colors can recede, and desaturated colors can recede. So we could take and go to our background here. We could take an adjustment layer and let's just go to hue and saturation again, my favorite one because it's so easy to work with, and just going to clip that first, and then we can desaturate it. So that's one thing you can do. So you can keep the brown tones but not so bright, and that automatically starts, you can see that. Let's just close that out here, just that one thing we did there. Can you see how now suddenly your character is much more in focus just by doing that one little thing? Maybe that's all you need to do. Now, something you'll notice here is that the corrections you made to the background, they're not changing because they're actually on a different layer right here. See? So there's a technique that's discussed in the tutorial for this assignment. The instructions is a video tutorial that actually talks about how you can sidestep that issue so that you can, have your changes and also an adjustment layer. So check that one out. But anyhow, I guess that's the main thing I'd work on here, is making your text a little more bold. Something I thought about with your text too is you've got a little red in here, maybe making it a little bigger, or maybe even going to a brighter kind of color could help it stand out. I do like the color you've chosen here because it picks up on this color here. So I don't think it's a bad choice, but you just want to get a little more visibility in it. Okay, and then, just working with the color palette and the background. Okay, yeah, wonderful that you were working with the additional layer and kind of cleaning up the names. I think that looks great, I didn't think that they were too distracting before, but I think that anytime you can simplify your design, it's always a good thing, and I think that looks really good. Okay, so let's talk about... Okay, let's just start with your character, which I think also has, like Joshua's before, has a lot of natural movement, and so I think I don't see anything that you need to change with your character. He really looks like he's very animated, which is awesome. That's the way to bring your character to life. And your color palette, I think, is also, you've got that very strongly developed from the beginning. You're using a lot of kind of gray colors, which is perfect, and then you've got this hint of red here, which is really nice. And then the background too is picking up a little bit on that red. So I would say maybe what you could do with the background is a little bit similar to Joshua's before, so you might want to desaturate your background just a little bit as well with an adjustment layer, just to kind of, again, there's a couple things I think you could do here. One thing I think you could do is maybe first sort of experiment with maybe increasing the contrast with adjustment layers, like to brighten up elements of the metal, to kind of make them a little sort of just shinier and brighter, and that would bring your character forward. And there's a number of ways to do that with adjustment layers. We're going to be in adjustment layers here, so you could go to brightness and contrast. Another thing that sometimes works in this particular instance, if you want to just lighten or brighten something, is use the exposure adjustment layer. This can actually look quite natural, and what you want to do is it's like the exposure of a camera, and you can see so you can see that's actually not doing a good job. It's actually sort of like, you could say, blurring it, like kind of reducing the detail. So, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Hold on a second here. I wanted to... Let's get rid of that for a moment. We could try that. Let's try that here. Let's try that on this one and see if it works. Sometimes you have to like go to different... let's go to one of the legs down here. Where are they? Hold on a second. Okay, right here. So let's try the exposure there and see. Eh, yeah, I don't know if I like that either. So I might just go, it's sort of kind of tending to just sort of like remove a little of the details. So you could try brightness and contrast. So you could just brighten it a little tiny bit. Maybe, so you might just experiment with some of the different adjustment layers to do that. Oh, it looks like I've turned something off here. Hold on. Okay, all right. So the other thing you could try is also just reducing the background even a little bit more by adding an adjustment layer back here to desaturate this, just like we did before. Um, again, just even small, subtle changes can really make a big difference. So like just taking and reducing the saturation of that background, you can see how, it's still very clearly a warm background, but look at how different that makes suddenly the character stands out a little bit more. So you could do that. The toolbox I think is a cool touch, but I'm wondering if maybe you could simplify that, maybe. If you really like have your heart set on it, then I'd keep it, but maybe you don't need it. Maybe there's enough tools in your character that we don't need the extra, the additional reference. Do you know what I mean? Um, I think that's all yeah, I think that's it. I think everything else looks really good. You're in good shape at this point. I think you've got a lot of work done, and I think yeah, it's looking really good. So, yeah, just keep experimenting with just those color, balance, foreground, background, and if there's anything else you see in your character that you think you'd like to play around with, feel free to do that. These are just some of the things that catch my eye right away. But a lot of times, even at this stage, when people get to this stage, a lot of times students will find, things that they just want to change, to move their character a little further down the road or in a different direction, and that's perfectly fine to do. You don't just have to stick with the color corrections or the spot healing approaches at this stage. That's all right. Yes, I like this background a lot more in terms of just making it a little bit simpler. And, I could see even making it more simpler. I'm always pushing for that. So the first thing I kind of experimented with was just first of all, using the crop tool to straighten this line out, because to begin with I noticed that this line was a little bit angled, and so you just kind of I think we did this in one of the exercises where you take the crop tool and you click the straighten button, and then you just hold down and you go across, and that straightens it. And I thought maybe that would be good, but then I actually then also just hold on just a sec while it renders. That maybe just expanding it. So I expanded the um, image just a little bit more so it was a little higher up, so that even now there's just a little um, less of the background, but it still provides a hint of it. And again, just having more attention on the characters. So you might give that a try, just again to simplify the background. I might even consider taking this line. I was thinking, maybe just even taking this line out, like just using the correction tool to remove that line and just let it be um, further simplified, because I'm not sure if that really adds to your design, but it does definitely provide a little more distraction. And again, we don't necessarily want that to happen. So otherwise, I think this looks awesome, really great. So let's see, and maybe I might even consider maybe making your shadow a tiny bit darker, right in here in the opacity, just sort of experiment and see. Usually I'm always saying people should make their shadows lighter, but in your case I actually think maybe even a little darker. Maybe that's too much, but maybe just a hint darker, just so that it's as obvious as possible. Anyhow, your color looks fantastic. I don't think you need to do any color work on this, because you've got the reds, the orange, the yellow, and then sort of the neutral colors in the background. So I think it all ties together nicely. I think your text ties in nicely with the colors overall. And, if you did any corrections on your character. I didn't see any before. You know, your photos looked really great from the beginning. Maybe you did a little bit here. Oh, no, that was, yeah, the extra splashes. So I don't think, I don't think you need to do any corrections in terms of removing any blemishes or anything like that. So, okay, that's it. Nice job. Okay, Danielle. Um, okay, yeah, so you have done a lot of different changes throughout your design, which is fantastic. And it looks like, I think one of your latest changes was adding this sort of spotlight around your character. Hmm. I think so. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it did. Um, that's a change. Okay, so let's see. Now, one of the things you definitely want to be doing in this assignment is adding some adjustment layers. I definitely think there is a lot of room for you to be using adjustment layers. Let's see. So you've got this arm and this arm, two different arms. So what I would suggest doing, maybe with an adjustment layer, is matching these two arms together, you know, by taking this arm here and, or the other arm, but let's do this arm and let's try color balance to begin with and see what we can do with that. So we want to increase the amount of yellow in this one. So there we go. That's pretty close of a match now. And you know, maybe we could add a little more, maybe more, yeah, you know, I'm just fixing it. You could get in here and play with it, but that's a pretty close one. So things like that would be really helpful in your character. And I would definitely, you know, do some correction here and remove maybe some of these logos because I feel like these are a little distracting. So see if Photoshop will do that using some of the techniques we worked with. And back to color, think about a little bit more about your color. You've got a lot of red, so that's great. I think that's in the direction you want to go with is red, but you also have, so you have sort of pink, blue, yellow, brown, gray, green, and some purple. So you've got a lot of different colors here, and I think you could do some, decide what colors you want to work with. So Terrible Toys Todd, you want red. Maybe you want to go with complementary colors and make everything red and green, which would be pretty powerful. Um, or whatever you choose. Like I always recommend 2 to 3 colors as being the maximum amount of colors you want in a lot of designs. I think that, you know, that palette would, restricting your colors will really create that sense of unity we're always looking at. So let's do some selective color here. We talked a little bit before about how you can use adjustment layers. So I'm going to use your assignment here to demonstrate a really interesting technique using adjustment layers that I think is really, really cool. So when you have an element that has multiple colors in it, like your legs, and you only want to change one of the colors, when you're choosing an adjustment layer, then hue and saturation, well, you actually can sort of slightly change different colors, but it's often better to go to this adjustment layer called selective color in this one, because this one, what you can do is in this drop down menu right here, you can actually select what color you want to change. So for example, down here, if we want to change just the purple colors, I might choose maybe magenta, sometimes blue. Sometimes you actually have to pick more than one color, but let's start with magenta. And so now we're going to select it. Let's say we want to turn the magenta green. So we're going to use these sliders here to turn down colors that don't belong in green and to add in colors that do. So for example, maybe we want to remove some of the magenta and some of the cyan. Let's see. So we'll start with that. And then we're going to increase the yellow. Okay, we're not quite there yet. So now we need to, let's add some cyan back. So we're making it a little more blue at this point. Let's pause here and let's actually go and choose maybe some Let's try some blue. So the original color was maybe a combination of blue and magenta, so sometimes you have to work with two colors. So let's do the same thing. Let's increase the yellow, and maybe we'll decrease the magenta, because you know green is made out of yellow and blue, and cyan is blue. So let's so now we're getting a little closer here. Let's just see. So we'll just kind of experiment back and forth here. Maybe we'll increase the cyan here. No, I think we've got maybe we have too much cyan. So let's go back to these two colors and see if we can. Okay, well that's a little more green. We could even go to cyan itself. Sometimes, again, it could be a combination of a little cyan, and let's remove some of that magenta again and seeing if adding some yellow. I'm not really seeing too much of a change here. A little bit. Um, let's zoom in. Yeah, okay. Well, you know, we could keep experimenting, but it's much closer. And notice how the green itself has not been affected at all, which is pretty interesting, isn't it? Because we didn't touch any of the green. So this is a really great technique to work with. And you see, you could do the same thing with the head here. Like maybe you want to reduce some, let's just do that as well and just experiment with selective color with the head. And so if we want to just go with, let's say we just want to go with red and green. So let's remove the blue here. Let's start with the cyan. I think this looks pretty cyan, so maybe the nose looks a little more blue. So we can start reducing that. Maybe reduce some of the magenta. Start with, let's increase the yellow. Maybe we would have to go to blue. Okay, so now we're starting to see a little bit of a change here towards it looking a little more green. I just chose, so the nose is definitely more green. So I just chose green, you know, because I was thinking green and red. What if we changed everything to green and red? So you can see how just with some experimenting, you can start really drastically changing the color. So that's what I'd work on here. I'm not sure about this little ear element here. Was this on the original? It was, yeah. I think I may have mentioned this earlier. If not, something I think that would be great is if you found something without this little label on it, because it looks like it's kind of like a little branding tag, and I think it takes away with what you're doing with Terrible Toys Todd, which is that you're wanting to make Terrible Toys Todd the brand. So maybe, you know, there's lots of cute little heads out there or like bodies of stuffed toys, so I might replace that with something else. Okay, you might want to make a shadow in yours, a drop shadow to kind of situate your character on the ground using the cast shadow technique from the instructions, I think, from last week. And then I might, you know, maybe think about doing something with the text just to brighten it up a little bit. It looks a little bit um, like it's fading in, like maybe a brighter color, or you could use, um, you know, this inner shadow here. Let's just go in here. Maybe the inner shadow, instead of black, you could try making white and see if that, let's see what that does. Didn't quite change it, but you could maybe add a stroke around it. You know, I think I'm not able to quite change it because I don't have the font. But you could, you know, um, maybe add a white outline around it. So keep experimenting here. I think you've got, you know, a little ways to go here. Really, you want to make sure you're fulfilling the assignment with correcting elements, adding adjustment layers, and so hopefully some of the techniques we've talked about today will help you get started on that and also push you to keep developing your design a little bit more. Okay, all right. Yes, it's great that you did a little bit of spot fixing for your character, exactly what you wanted to do. Um, And the other thing you wanted to do is add in some adjustment layers, 2 adjustment layers. Okay, and let's actually just start by looking at your character. You noticed I just sort of zoomed in here so we could really look at your character. And I think your character, I don't think you need to add any more parts to your character. You mentioned that. Um, I think it looks really good the way it is. And I think that, it seems to really fit together nicely. And overall, just, it's working. I would say maybe experiment a little bit more with some movement with your character. It looks a little bit like it's just sort of really stiff at this point, and adding movement to your character, which we have been experimenting with in the class, some of our exercises, can really make a big difference. So let's see, here's your leg. Things like you could work with puppet war, but you can also just kind of experiment with moving your arms and legs in different directions. A good rule of thumb or a way to develop movement in a character is just sort of think about how people actually, like somebody might move, like might they be jumping or walking or waving their hands? Like what are some things you could do that could really, I'm not sure if maybe maybe what we could do here is we could go up to I'm in the edit panel right now. It's a little bit higher than my video screen, but going to edit and then going to transform, you could maybe flip this vertical, this arm. So then suddenly now you've got a cute little arm that's like maybe going downwards, instead of upwards. And that itself already starts to, create a little movement. So, you can just, play around with that. Like maybe there's a little puppet warping you could do if you wanted to. But, have fun with your character and just sort of play around with, bringing it to life a little bit more. Sort of, I don't know if that was a good move, but sort of just thinking about maybe the mouth needed to be a little higher in connection with the eyes. But, that kind of thing. So, okay, let's zoom out a little bit. Okay, so your colors. So you definitely have a color palette here, which is greens, yellows, and then you've got a touch of red. That's your color palette. So what I would say is you want to make sure that I would say that your text picks up on that color a little bit more, I would consider, let's see, I think I do have your character text. So I'm going to go up into the character panel, maybe making it a little bigger or bolder. Sometimes bold can be, let's try bold. Okay, that's probably better already. Okay, so that already brings it to life a little bit more in terms of the text. And then you could sort of you can actually take your clipping mask image and you can use adjustment layers on it. So so you can take and selectively, change the colors. Like I think there's some dark colors in here that I don't know if they quite work for your character, because there's not a lot of other really dark colors in your character. So I mean, I just might play with that a little bit more, tie it in. Maybe it needs a little more green in it. I like the red. I think the red is awesome because it matches your eyes, and you definitely want to have some red somewhere else in the design to kind of ground these eyes so that you've got red as part of your color palette. I would keep working with your background. I don't think it's quite working yet. So I'm not a fan of, and I think most people, of reducing the opacity to reduce the emphasis on an element. I think it's better to use other tools, like just opening this up now. Suddenly, we've got the ground, which now I think looks really great. I think you need to have a really solid ground for your character, and it brings your shadow to life. So why don't you just go and like blur out the background, which is probably what I would do. I would just go in here and just, really blur it out, so that we don't need to see, we've got a counter. That's all we really need for Flippin' Food Fran is the food counter. We don't think we need to see much else in the kitchen. We know we're in a kitchen. So take out the background in terms of the distractions. And another thing you can do as well, um, or in addition, in addition to it, is you could take your background and just make it a bit bigger. And if it's a high resolution photo, you can really, it looks like it's going to work. You can really like reduce a lot of detail by zooming in. So now we just have the counter. We maybe have a little bit, we could maybe blur out this top a little bit more. Or you could remove some of these elements, using some of the patching tools. So, or let's see if we move this off to the right. Not super keen on some of these elements here. Maybe somehow you could sort of play around with that, or just maybe find a photo that's just a countertop and then just a wall behind it, so you don't have to do all this work, you know? So already we can see that the character is really starting to even look a little bit more uh, in focus in the foreground. So keep experimenting with those parts. I think you're getting there, and add some movement, experiment with your type, experiment a little bit more with your background. Okay. All right. Well, your text looks so much better now. It's simple, but yet has a lot of personality, and it's very legible, which is great. Actually, I think you've done a really nice balance between legibility and character, which is something we're always trying to do. Okay, and yeah, so I think your character, I think it's definitely better in terms of, having this jukebox body. I think it has more, it seems to start looking a little bit more like a character. I'm still not 100% sure about the jukebox itself because I think that it's still a very busy element. There's so much writing on it. I don't know if there's jukeboxes out there that are simpler, but that might be something to look at, is like to simplify that particular element so that it starts reading more character-like. Um, let's just look. Yeah, I don't think I found anything simpler because I think by their nature, jukeboxes, are all about the songs, the many, many songs and the choices and all of the different kind of technology, even in the older ones. So, yeah, so I think that's probably your best choice. Again, I would still probably suggest simplifying it, but if this is what you've wanted to go with, then I think, then you should work with that. Um, I would say then what I would work on is a couple things. First, I'd work on the space itself. You've got a lot of empty space around your character, so I would consider an easy way to fix that is I'd like that spotlight. I think that's a really nice thing to have in your character. So I'm going to move that over a little bit, and then I'm going to grab the cropping tool and just crop off everything that is unnecessary to the side here, like so, so that we really, really emphasize the character. Okay, so that's already better. And then the other thing I would work on is the color palette. So think about, just like we've talked about with other students, what is going to be your color palette? To me, it looks like you definitely have red as a very important part of your color palette, so you probably want to stick with that. And then you also have like brown, which, I mean, you can change any color you want. So if you don't like these colors, you can make changes to them. Browns, you've got blacks, you've got blues, you've got some oranges, greens, that throughout the character. So I would, kind of pick some colors and then using the adjustment tools that we've been looking at, like selective colors, just remove, any colors that you don't want to have as part of your character, you know? So maybe you've got a lot of orange as well, so maybe red, orange, and orange. So maybe you would take and maybe, remove some of the greens, the blues, you know. So just, have fun with that and, work with the adjustment layers. And I don't see any adjustment layers yet in your file, so you've got a lot of opportunity to work with those. Remember, you want to have at least 2 adjustment layers, but use as many as you need to, to adjust the design. Okay, so that's some of the things I would work on a little bit more. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions. Okay, Cal, great. Yeah, I'm glad you were working with the adjustment layers. That's exactly what you want to do. So you said that you used an adjustment layer to kind of make it a little more, yeah, you're right. It had a lot of weird green tones. I agree. That's a much better choice. Good. Great. Okay, so in your design, let's see. What I would say that you could continue working with, first of all, with your character, I would work on some movement with your character. You know, how you might want to just sort of bring it to life a little bit more. Maybe move the arms around. You could, you know, there's all kinds of things you can like tilt the head. Um, you know, think about how, um, I'm not sure what's behind there that did that, but you can sort of play around with your character just to bring it to life a little bit more. Um, I would just, let's see here, let me just move back here. Like the previous um, project, I would definitely take off some of these sides. You don't need so much of the brick wall and space around your character. Like just kind of, you know, really block him in a little bit more. So instead of a square, it's going to be more of like a portrait style, like where it's, you know, cut off there. You'll probably have to reduce the size of your text a little bit, which is fine to narrow it. Okay, so your text. So Garden Glitter Glen. You've got two sort of lines of text. You've added an extra text. So when you do that, it's a good idea to make one big and one smaller. That's what we call uh, contrast in typography, which is something you'll probably learn later on. But just a simple way to kind of, you know, it makes the text look better and it gives emphasis to a certain part. So what do we want to emphasize? We definitely want to emphasize Garden Glitter Glen. So if you want to keep this text, Biker Edition, I would make it much smaller, you know, really small and just like a little accent. So it you get that contrast in there and then emphasize the Garden Glitter Glen. Okay, so those are the main things. I might continue to experiment with some adjustment layers just in some of these areas where, so you've got a lot of your, let's talk about the color palette. So your color palette is really mostly it's gray tones, okay? And then some of these sort of pinks and oranges. So, uh, you know, this color here picks up nicely with this color, which is great. Um, and I would say probably just in terms of adjustment layers, I might add some adjustment layers to anywhere in the design where it appears that the design, like the character is blending into the background. You know, can you see how it's sort of, in places here, it's so similar that it's blending in. So you might want to brighten it. You know, parts you could either, you know, you could play with the adjustment layer in the background and sort of maybe lighten it or darken it, or you could take the arms and the legs, you know, the hands and the legs and sort of brighten them, or you know, see what you can do to make them look a little bit more distinct from one another. You know, so you get more contrast in color. So contrast in text, contrast in color, they're sort of the same thing. Like we could, let's just go to the background and see if we brighten it, what happens. Still, we probably don't want to get any darker because it is already pretty dark. So I'd probably go with your elements of your character. I could even see doing that with your plant pot body because it's also seems like it's kind of getting a little lost in the background as well. We're losing some detail. You might want to try the exposure technique for oh, that's what, yeah, I might, it looks like you added a filter here. I kind of think you might want to keep it more like the original so you keep your detail of your plant pot rather than losing that, you know? Okay, all right, well, I hope that's been helpful. Just kind of keep tweaking it, work with some movement, work with a little contrast, and maybe work with the space. You know, just boxing your character in a little bit more. And all right, yeah, so you've added some adjustment layers here. That was a good choice. I think it adds a little bit of richness to your design, you know, kind of enriches the colors a little bit through the levels, which was great. So you applied it to all of your design, which is good. Yeah, so I would say overall this is looking good. I love your text. I think that looks really good. And you know, the design of your character. And so I would work a little bit more on the color, even more on the color. So again, just sort of naming what kind of colors you have. So you've got green, orange, red, blue, yellow. I would reduce one or two of those colors. You know, maybe make the blueberry red or yellow, or um, you know, maybe take the red of the Twizzlers and make them orange or green, you know, just kind of keep experimenting to reduce the number of colors a little bit more. I might even take your background and maybe adjust the color a little bit as well, maybe make it a little more desaturated, so it's not so, you know, coming forward. I might even go in here and maybe remove some of the elements up here on the counter, just, you know, to remove distractions if you can. You know, just kind of keep experimenting with it. I might work a little bit with movement of the character. I was just moving this to see if we could maybe reduce some of the lines back here. You know, the cupboard lines. Maybe we don't need to see so many lines. Maybe enlarge it a bit more. Maybe add a bit movement to your character, you know. So maybe think about what your color character might be doing. Maybe it would be stepping forward or stepping back, or, you know, just, you know, different ways that you, maybe its head could be tilted, just so that you can give it a little bit more life and animation. Okay, so that's what I'd work on. Okay, I think that's it, everybody. Next critique will be on Friday, I believe. Hold on. So yes, next critique is November 2nd, which is Friday. And then our class is closing on November 3rd.